welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is a comics podcast, and this is your host, Ilana Levin, aka Twitter's Ilana Brooklyn. This is the comics podcast for people who love comics and music. Joining me on the show are two folks from the creative team of the new graphic novel anthology, The Deadbeats. What is Deadbeats? The Deadbeats music shop is filled with deadly secrets, run by the mysterious Shoppe Keeper. Customers can browse through cursed records, evil sheet music, and instruments of the damned. Our host has dozens of spooky stories to tell you from some of the top names in comics. You're going to want to put on your favorite album when you crack open this anthology. That's right, joining me today is Joe Corallo. Joe is a comics editor who curated and co-edited the Eisner-nominated and Ringo Award-winning Mine anthology, and actually was on the show a million years ago to talk about it with us, which was a fundraiser for Planned Parenthood. He edited the GLAAD-nominated Oh Shit, It's Kim and Kim, as well as the Deadbeats anthology with Eric Palicki. He is also a writer whose work includes writing and co-creating She Said Destroy at Vault Comics. And he's joined by artist Liana Kangas. Liana Kangas co-created and illustrated She Said Destroy for Vault Comics and has done artwork for 2000 AD, Black Mask Studios, O Wave Blue World, Image, and more. Her work is featured in both the 2018 and 2019 Ringo Award-winning Mine and Where We Live. She illustrated a story for the Deadbeats anthology written by Eric Palicki. Welcome to the show, you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Also want to tell you guys about the comic that they worked on together, which is She Said Destroy, out by Vault Comics.
Which itself is actually a reference to the spooky neo-folk band Death in June.
Here's the description. The witches of Fae are the last believers of the Morrigan, goddess of death, Brigid's sister, and the only other god left. As Brigid's forces prepare for one final battle, the Morrigan prepares to do what she does best, destroy. So, thanks for joining me on the show, you guys.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad we got it to work out.
Yeah. Whenever I have comics teams together, I always like to ask them, how did you guys first get connected, and how did you begin working on work together?
Oh, Joe, you want to answer?
Sure. Liana was actually in the Mine anthology, so that's how I first became aware of her. She drew Pat Shan's story, and then I met Liana in person. It was like December 30th, 2017, for our big Forbidden Planet launch signing.
Late in the year?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was really late in the year because
it snowed.
Yeah, it was snowing because the book came out the last Wednesday of the year.
Oh, yeah.
So we had the signing of Forbidden Planet. And, it was great. Denny O'Neil came down. It was a lovely time. But,
wow.
Yeah, it was good. And then, I got to talk to Liana there. And we had been keeping in touch since then. And then I had this idea, for She Said Destroy, like the bare bones of it. And Liana was actually the first person I talked to about it. I approached it with her being like, do you like Sailor Moon and Final Fantasy and stuff like that?
And obviously I said yes.
Obviously.
Yes. I can see that.
But oddly enough, we were working on that, pitching it, and Vault was actually the first people we pitched this to, and they said yes. And one of the sort of funny things about it is we actually did a comic together before we started that. We did a 4-pager in the Everything Is Going Wrong anthology. But that came out after this series wrapped. It just worked out that way. So Liana actually not only wrote the story for Everything Is Going Wrong, but, she drew it, and then she also had the story in mind, and I was more or less like adapting the story into like dialogue.
Joe and I got to know each other really well because it was sort of mostly an autobiographical thing, and we both had really close friends that had passed away for both of us during that time, and so we just went all in emotionally, and he just wrote that story for me, and it was great, honestly. So it was a really cool way to like test the waters before working on the series together.
Yeah.
Right. Because, having the right partnership just is super essential.
Yeah. crucial.
I mean, you're thinking about things like what are your aesthetics that you're looking for a series, and I think that's one of the really cool things about the way you guys are working together is when you're at like Marvel or DC, they have a tendency, unless you're very unless you're like a very powerful writer or artist there, to just pair you up with whoever they want to see you paired up with. But
right. Yeah.
You guys are able to have a lot of intentionality in like this is the right artist for this particular story.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I was glad that Joe asked me. For our first series starting out for co-created, it during the whole process, like it didn't really dawn on me that it was really happening until it was like, oh, we actually made this. Holy shit. Like
yeah, it's crazy because when I first was talking to Vault about this, it was Emerald City 2018. And then we were there for Emerald City 2019, and Vault actually they surprised us by having a big banner when you enter the escalators going into the venue there with Liana's Morrigan design for She Said Destroy.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah, so they really they really put a lot into it, which we really appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's been coming. We only just wrapped it. Beginning of last month in terms of the 5th issue coming out. So it's still pretty fresh with us.
Super fresh, yeah.
Well, Liana, when I'm looking at your art, like I can see, you're working digitally, obviously, and I feel like you have a particularly modern sort of style. And this is a story is very futuristic. But also has, fantasy and mythology in it. How does that sort of influence how you're drawing the characters?
Oh, thanks for calling it modern. I really appreciate that. With it being set in the very far future and everything, it gave us the ability to make it as sci-fi as possible, and that's my favorite genre. And it was kind of cool to have that mix of like, anime-inspired type colors and stuff like that, and still work with it being fantasy. And I think that oftentimes when we see fantasy stuff, it's not really as bright and futuristic looking like that. So
yeah,
it was really cool to have, or try our hand at, make it look sci-fi and fantasy together.
Right. Right. It feels like a lot of things fall into one or the other category and not into both.
Yeah.
Who are the influences on your drawing?
Oh boy. I think I put a lot of people on blast pretty often, but like I love Becky Cloonan's work. I love Paula Zaceda, who's a friend, and I love like Jim Mafood. He's a huge inspiration to me. A lot of people that are, pretty within the last decade worth of comics work. But I think mostly those are my top, influences.
Those are some great people. At the same time I was reading this to prep for the show, I've been reading the next volume. I mean, it's a volume from like a million years ago, but like the next volume for me of A Distant Soil, which is which is Colleen Doran's like big fantasy, sci-fi fantasy, futurist. Well, it's not in the futuristic, but because they're in space, lots of stuff is really futuristic, even though the characters are like actually from the 80s at this point. But I felt like those kind of had a similar vibe as each other, even though the art is really different. Have you guys read that series at all?
Yeah, I'm actually I'm a big fan of Colleen's, and I have a few years or so ago when she started doing the reprints of that through her website, I was picking up those, and I even own some original art from Colleen. I'm a really big fan of hers.
I have one of her pages behind me, but it's from a Power Pack, and it's like has all those reptile dudes. So
nice. I love Power Pack too. I love they did that one shot was a few months ago now, and that was really great.
I'll have to check it out.
Nope.
I actually did not know they had a Power Pack one-shot.
Yeah, and it is Louise Simonson and June Brigman.
Oh, wow. That's fun.
Yeah, it was really great. And it takes place during that, like, sort of time when the book was coming out.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like, there's some cameos from, like, Claremont era, like, Wolverine and Kitty Pryde and stuff like that. It's really great.
Oh, fun. But yeah, they both are, like, take place in space and have this, like, combination of, like, really what feels like magic as well as, like, technology-based crazy things happening all the time, and have a really feminine sort of aesthetic.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Everybody
awesome.
has great hair, which is also important for your work. So when it comes to, like, character design for a story like this, where you're really creating something whole cloth, like, how did you guys approach that together?
We went back and forth a couple times, just trying to be like, well, we want to stay away from being heavily inspired off of any, like, movies or anything like that, but, we want to use I wanted to use some fashion influences and, make it actually functional, I guess. Mostly because, like, I thought about cosplay and, like, what actually would work, or, even just, like, in general, like, what somebody would want to wear versus, like, cape and tights. And it was nice to collaborate with Joe because he wanted to have some influences on certain cultures' fashions. So we kind of sent a whole bunch of stuff back and forth, but also wanted to have the inspiration of, the goddess of death, like, what type of things that would enhance her personality, because a lot of the time we weren't really seeing her with dialogue at first, so wanted to make her stand out, and as well as the followers and everything like that.
Yeah, we what was it with the designs that Liana was doing? I mean, pretty much the designs she came up with are basically what stuck around. There were very few modifications to any of the character designs, but when it came to, like, the Morrigan, Liana made sure to use, that the Morrigan was going to be this, like, sort of pale character with a lot of, like, cool colors, like blues and purples and things like that.
But nothing too dark.
Yeah, but nothing too dark, whereas, Brigid was very, like, not only is her attire sort of like someone who's going to be out in the sun, but also, having the bright orange hair and all of that. Like, it really, sort of subtly tied, I think, everything together.
And I think the reason why I wanted to mix fashion is because they're supposed to be goddesses. So I wanted to pull, like, some certain pieces in terms of not really couture, but, something to make them look on another level. So
street fashion is an influence as well as couture and stuff like that.
Yeah. Especially for, like, the mobility of the characters and stuff like that.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. I just love the cover of issue 4. That's just such a badass cover, like, everybody's posture and all that. But it also really shows you how great the color work is. The colorist is
Rebecca Nolte.
Who's the colorist on that?
I actually did the cover, so thank you.
Well, you did amazing color work on that cover. Good God! But the color work throughout this is really cool, really well done.
Yeah, she's honestly, she's really cool. She's been super, flexible. Like, actually, around the first, like, page she sent, we were like, oh, yep, this works. Like, she totally got it right off the bat. It was amazing.
Yeah, and Rebecca's the only one of us who's actually from and currently lives in Ireland, so that was nice. And funny story, Rebecca actually went to St. Brigid Elementary School.
Oh. Oh, wow. So, yeah, I mean, Joe, like, you rooted this in that sort of Irish mythology. Like, what is the draw of that particular pantheon of gods for you?
There's a few draws, one of which is my great-grandmother, Beatrice, was born and raised in Waterford and lived down the road from us growing up, and I got to know her as a kid and, kind of doing something for her. And I've always sort of been interested in a lot of that stuff and a lot of the sort of deities, and I think it's a combination of a few things. It's a combination of, I had sort of a phase where I wanted to learn a lot about, paganism just because I was interested in just knowing it, just even if it was purely academic, just having more of an idea of it. And I feel like when I was growing up through high school and even into college, everything everyone taught was Greek and Roman gods and goddesses. And,
Yeah.
And so as interested as I was in that kind of stuff, I really wanted to go and, I was like, it made like those sort of Irish and Celtic gods in that pantheon more interesting to me because I didn't know as much about it, and just like these characters like Morrigan just throughout our history, also basically being Morgana from the Arthur myths and all of that. Excalibur is one of my favorite films, the 1982 John Borman movie, and I think she's portrayed really interestingly in there. But yeah, that's kind of what drew me to a lot of that.
It's so funny because I really grew up with the D'Olier's book of Greek myths, and to me, like, mythology when I was a kid equaled like Greek mythology. And whenever I would try to check out any other big pantheons, it was always like, this is weird. I mean, the thing is, Greek is weird too. Yeah. It's really weird. But it was sort of like normative. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Irish was still sort of like, what even is happening?
Yes, absolutely.
But I think two of the big recent things with some of the Irish mythology in the comics world have been the Morrigan, obviously in The Wicked and the Divine, and that just being a place where they're talking about gods a lot in general. And then they had Siren from X Factor became the Morrigan briefly back during X Factor, which at this point is quite a long time ago, but doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, that Peter David run was really great.
Oh, man, that man broke my freaking heart. He broke my heart.
Yeah, well.
I know, it was like, we were talking about New York Comic Con stuff just before you came on, but it was like, as someone whose like favorite comic writer as a kid was Peter David, I really did not want to have to be the person to break the news that he was massively anti-Romani bigoted, but nobody else covered that story, so I did. Yeah. Anyway, so WicDiv definitely shows that there's a big audience for people to read comics with mythological characters right now. I mean, lots of comics have done that over time. I mean, Thor, hello, right? Yeah. But was Wicked and the Divine an influence in this work at all, or
I definitely think
part
so
of how you sold it, or?
For sure. I love Matt Wilson, and a lot of what him and Jamie do for that series. In general, Jamie, like, I've been following their work since Phonogram, and they showed me, like, and I actually told them this at New York, I was like, you guys literally showed me that what type of potential could be in comics, like, what I could probably give to comics, you know what I mean? Like, it opened that, like, door for me, like, mentally, and I love the way they use color, Matt uses color and everything with Jamie, and like how that works so seamlessly with the storytelling. It was a huge influence for sure for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of The Wicked and the Divine. I think I only let it be an influence to a point because you didn't, it's like, I don't want it to be close to The Wicked and the Divine, right. We went in a lot of different directions than that. Oh, yeah. But it's impossible for it to not be some level of an influence. And I mean, there's a lot of different influences here. I think we especially drew a lot from, like we were saying with like Sailor Moon, and I'm a big fan of Sailor Moon, the manga series, the anime, all that. There's some Star Wars influences in there.
Yeah.
The basics.
They got those awesome light swords. I mean.
Yeah. And we got, and the basic story structure is that classic sort of, storming the castle kind of story, just in space.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that kind of stuff is kind of what we were going for.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to be just sort of like, the Wicked was probably one of the reasons why some people knew who the Morrigan was. So you're like, okay, good. People know the name of this god now. It's not like I'm just name dropping something that is super obscure and people will be like, who, the what?
Yeah.
So that's at least helpful, like in terms of just introducing people to more mythology.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you're doing a lot of really unique world building here, and you had to do it really quickly because it's a short series, and you're just dropping people into the deep end. So, how did you approach that with the writing?
On the writing end, you know, again, it was this like breakneck speed of just like in the first issue, it was like, okay, we have to have like the Morrigan kind of explain enough of what's going on in like that first page. And then drop us immediately to our main protagonist, followed by immediately showing our main antagonist. Like, it was just this sort of like, okay, so like by page 6, you've met all of like the really important people in this book. And just keeping it going from there. We didn't want to over-explain anything. You know, we kind of just let the action and the story and the characters interacting build the world for us. You know, we showed a bit of sparring in the first like second and third pages of the first issue to sort of be like, okay, this is how magic works, and just like that kind of stuff, because we have no time to really go into a lot of this stuff or to build it up. So it was like, okay, we need to establish this magic in this world. We need to show all this stuff, and then we had to figure out a way for the Light Knights to show off what they can do. So we wanted to do this thing where it was like, okay, they're going to like just slide through light and space to get to, you know, that outpost to take out Jacqueline, and use Jacqueline to show, like, it was like, first couple of pages we kind of show the basic bits of magic, and then Jacqueline is like the advanced course, where she's like, you know, breaking items to create, you know, more destruction and all of that. So yeah, I mean, and I always wanted the last page to be the Morrigan saying destroy for the first issue. So it was like just getting all of that stuff in. And then, you know, it's pretty breakneck from there in terms of like the invasion starts in the second issue. You know, so it was like introducing this other character, Gareth, who was more of a hothead that's sort of like a parallel to Raoul. Waiting for the second issue to do that because we are doing too much of the first issue, and, you know, just...
I feel like you had to put a trilogy in 5 issues. Like, no joke.
Yeah, and I mean, there's plenty of room to like expand from there, and I mean, we also have ideas if we ever had the opportunity to do more of what else we could do. And we intentionally sort of set up this world where if we do more in it, it doesn't necessarily have to be directly after this. It could be in the even further future. It could be in the past. Like, we could really jump around and play in this sort of world.
Yeah.
Totally. And you have this really great diverse cast, which is important. I mean, people are not white in the world today, and will certainly be not white in the future. So it's always good to see people actually taking that into account. And then I also was great to have kind of a range of different body types and some body diversity of the characters. Like, what was your approach in that? Because I know that to me, it's like an important part of character development, of being able to tell who the heck is who, of like reflecting reality, of, you know, making like decent art. And so many artists are just like, oh, I can't draw fat people, I don't know how. It's like, well, too bad, it's your job, you gotta learn.
Yeah. I'm really glad you said that. I really appreciate it, hearing that from, you know, a reader and like comics perspective, you know. And a lot of times when I'm working on a script, if I read a character in a certain tone and they remind me of somebody, I try to make them actually look like somebody I know, you know, like within reason. So a lot of the characters that we worked on, you know, I just kind of based them off of people that I was familiar with, or like some of my closest friends. I mean, obviously they don't look identical to them, but hopefully close enough to where they'd be like, "Hey, is that me?" Like, did you?
Yeah, that's always a
did
cool
you draw
feeling.
me? And I'm like, yeah, I did. It's like kind of you. So, like 3 of my closest friends, had texted me and been like, "Oh, dude, I love you." Like, this is totally me, right? I'm like, yeah, it's you. Like, I love you too. Like,
That's a great feeling.
Yeah, I mean, Liana really killed it with the designs, and I think some of the more interesting elements of it is like the Morrigan's outfit, for example. It's the kind of outfit that if another artist sort of ran with it, could have easily made it something that was like more unsavory. And I think Liana did a great job of creating this sort of outfit it's not shy, but just playing it straight. And this is just how the Morrigan dresses, and no one makes any sort of comments about that. It's just this is this
Right.
person, and this is how they dress, and that kind of stuff. I think is important too.
That cliche thing where people say, I make the books that I want to read. I feel like for Joe and I, because of all the friends that we have and we kind of run in similar circles, I feel like it's easy to create a book like that because it's essentially like kind of like making a book for you and all your friends. So, and not to say that I'm making this for the younger book market. Like, I think that, a teen could read this and, like, be totally okay and everything. But, like, to have powerful characters where they can look up to them and not feel like, they can't look like them or whatever is really important to me. Just because, like, as a kid, like, I was always kind of looking at my body, like, being like, oh, I'd never cosplay as that character. Like, I always, like, had a Robin costume because, like, it was the easiest thing that I could find that I would feel comfortable in. You know what I mean? So, like, I don't want anybody to look at our designs and be like, well, I could never wear that. Like, no, everyone could hopefully find something that they feel like they connect with in this book, which is really important. So,
one of the cool theme... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was also just going to add in that something else that was like sort of an active decision in this was not doing any sort of real romance in this. Other than arguably the Morrigan and Winona to some level, possibly. But, beyond that, we wanted to do a book that was queer, but at the same time, so much of queer content feels like it's so dependent on there being romance and sexual interests and stuff like that, and I sort of wanted to do a book that felt queer and was welcoming to a queer audience, but also represented a wider sort of spectrum, and I think of other aspects of the queer community, Ace and Arrow people, and I wanted to sort of do something that also was a little more like inclusive of some of that stuff without beating people over the head with it, that this is just sort of what this world is.
And that came across really clearly and is really, as you said, refreshing to see. And another theme that I really noticed here is like you're dealing with, the antagonist is somebody who's establishing a cultural hegemony, and then the story is about how are people going to respond to that, which feels pretty typical. Not typical, which feels pretty topical.
Yes.
Which feels pretty topical. As a political theme for the story, was that one of the things that you were looking to dive into with this?
Yeah, I want to dive into it from like a sort of broader look at it, and there's a bit in issue 2 that I really wanted to do to highlight this, where it's that flashback where they're at a church for St. Brigid, and there's sort of conversation with that, and they continue having that conversation through the series, and I thought it would be interesting doing this story that, when you really zoom out, is you have this person who, with Brigid, is willing to do everything in her power to survive. And in order to survive, it doesn't matter if she's being honest with herself or to other people. It's about survival. I can't think of anything that could possibly parallel to going on right now. But
Exactly.
whereas the Morrigan is, unfaltering to her people and their protection in a way like some of those stories, that could easily be a negative thing of, being too stubborn and not being able to move on. And here I wanted to show some of the more positive sort of looks at, having that sort of conviction and fighting for your people and the way that your people live.
Woohoo. Yeah. Definitely feeling that. Well, I want to make sure we spend some time talking about the Deadbeats as well. I feel like it was the anthology that had the most buzz around it in a long time. And I was excited to check it out as well. And I love the whole idea of you've got like a hipster rock and roll horror host, basically.
Yeah.
She's perfect.
She's great, and that's all Lisa Sterl. She sent, we sort of told her what we were looking for. She sent us 3 designs, and she really nailed it. She did a fantastic cover. One of the caveats for the cover is, all the albums on it are some sort of reference to existing albums, but obviously they can't actually be the album for legal reasons. But one thing I wanted to make sure we slipped in was I didn't want any Beatles references on the cover, but I wanted a Yoko Ono reference.
God bless you, man.
Thank you. So that's why in the left corner, like left center corner of the rack with the albums, you see what's supposed to be Yoko Ono's Yes, I'm a Witch album.
I love it. I love it. That's so appropriate. It's so appropriate.
Yeah.
So how did that project come about?
It was an idea I just had that.
Gosh, you did that last year.
Yeah, it was. It was a little about a year ago. I sort of had this idea because I wanted to do another anthology, but I was like, I really want to do something that's more fun. That's not like a benefit or has a deeper theme right now. Even though I think I'm going to end up doing one like that next year, the year after, anyway. But I was like, I just want to do something that's like fun and entertaining that people can enjoy. That also I want to use as an excuse to make it really diverse and have a lot of queer people and people of color in the book without saying that right on the cover. So it's like, haha, you're actually reading a really diverse book. But I talked about it with Eric and Away Blue World, and they were immediately interested. And then I had sort of a list of people in mind, and then we compared lists and reached out to people, and just about everyone we were interested in wanted to be in it, and it was really smooth sailing.
I mean, you guys got Rachel Pollack of Doom Patrol fame, total comics legend who we haven't seen or heard from for a long time, to write like her first story. And how long had it been?
Other than very small things here and there, her last major comics work was over 20 years ago.
How do you ask a total legend and innovator to do something after 20 years?
I'm really lucky in that I've developed a bit of a relationship with Rachel Pollack over the years, because years ago, no joke, I cold emailed her after reading her Doom Patrol run, because she had a website with an email and all that, and she got back to me.
That's amazing.
And we ended up just becoming sort of like, pen pals more or less. And then, she lives outside the city, and it comes down every once in a while. So every once in a while, I'll see her, and we'll catch up and stuff. But I've really been trying to work with her to get her back into doing comics. And with this, I thought it would be excellent to get her working with Richard Case again. And then he said yes.
That's amazing.
And it was an afterthought. After they said yes, I was like, oh my God, why don't I just email John Workman? And I emailed John Workman, who lettered that whole run from Grant Morrison to the end of Rachel Pollack's run. And he wrote a really sweet email back saying, of course, he'd like to do it. And this reminded him of when he got to letter a reunion of Steve Englehart and Marshall Rogers at DC. And it was, it was like this really sweet moment, and it all came together like so well. And it just so happened, that the timing was right, that like this campaign on Kickstarter was running as like new episodes of Doom Patrol were coming out, and we were able to kind of push that. But
Joe is actually just a magician. I don't think I told you. So
I mean, it's just super cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
And it was a really neat place to have that be staged, basically. Like, it was definitely for me like oh wow, this is like having some real interesting intergenerational talent on the series.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that was really important to us, and there were a few other things that really sort of popped out as we were putting this together. One of my first ideas as we were starting to kind of either put teams together and reach out to people is I was like, I want to take Team Kim and Kim from Black Mask and give it to Kwanzaa. So I got to do that, and that was another fun story.
Yeah, that was a really fun story.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, why horror and music?
I've always liked that kind of stuff. All those kind of movies, like Phantom of the Paradise is a favorite of mine. Obviously like Rocky Horror Picture Show, all that stuff. But and then there's all of those like offbeat sort of like horror rock movies. Like Trick or Treat, Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, which I have also seen. I've seen both of those. And while I was in the process of putting this together, I also saw this ridiculous, like, Swedish or Norwegian, like, The Hills Have Eyes kind of movie, but it was about, like, this, like, Swedish metal band that gets, like, lost in the mountains. And it's like,
I think I've seen that.
It's ridiculous,
oh, wow.
but I've always, like, loved that kind of stuff. And when putting an anthology together, anthologies are really hard, but, like, one of the things about them is you have to do that thing where it's, like, it needs to be specific enough, but, like, broad enough at the same time. It needs to be welcoming, but you also need to present something new and interesting to get people to be like, oh, this stands out, I want to check this out. Yeah. So, like, horror anthology is too broad. What can I do to add something to make this interesting that isn't going to feel too esoteric to people? And it was like, oh, well, if I add music to it, and that could be a fun little way to go about it. And it turned out to be, the reception's been great. We've had 6 signings for the book since it's come out. And I got to be at like 5 of them.
Vita and I
Awesome.
sold out of the trade in the first day of Memphis Comic Expo. It was crazy.
That's awesome.
Tyler sent us a giant box of books.
Good.
Yeah, it's been great. We went down to Amalgam in Philly the other day, which is a great shop.
Yeah.
And it's my second time going down there for a signing, and that was just one of the shops where it was like, we need to do something there. And, also East Side Mags, is another great supportive shop in Montclair, New Jersey.
I miss Jeff.
Yeah, and if you're on Long Island, we did one at Fourth World Comics, and they bought a few extra copies as well. And Glenn, like, that store's been there like at least 30 years or so. And yeah, it's easily one of the best shops on Long Island, that and Escape Pod in Huntington. We didn't do a signing for them there, but they supported us on the Kickstarter and all of that, and that's a great shop too. But yeah, and obviously Forbidden Planet for our launch was fun. Of course it was like raining a ton, but it's fine. It happens.
It makes it all the more spooky.
Yeah, and for anyone listening out in St. Louis, Star Clippers did a signing with Steens and Marie Anger out there, who are like also two of our favorite people, I think, rightly.
Oh yeah, 100%. Love them both. Actually, I get to see Marie, I think, in like 2 weeks, which is great.
That's really exciting. Yeah, Marie was super sweet. We went out there during our She Said Destroy tour in the Midwest. We ended up doing a tour through, what was it, like, we hit Memphis, St. Louis, Chicago, Indianapolis, and, so Marie came out for that in St. Louis, and same with Steens. And
Steens took us to that rad bar, the one on the roof. Wow.
Yeah, we went to a rooftop bar in St. Louis. That was really nice, but yeah, and Challengers, which hosted us for a signing, and they just opened up a new location, right?
And they are so amazing. I cannot stress how great they are to creators. Like, they were so good to Joe and I. So good. I love them very much.
Yeah. Next time I go to Chicago, which I eventually have to because I have friends out there, I have to go back there because they were just such sweethearts.
Well, I think the whole music and horror combination makes so much sense. Like, I got into horror movies through music because as a kid, I was way too chicken to watch anything horror related. Mm-hmm. But I ended up it was the 90s and I was a goth kid and we were like, go to like listen and see like My Life with a Thrill Kill Cult and like all the horror, all these different like B-movie samples and all the references. And like, that was sort of one of my entry points into horror in general. And I think that that's not unusual. And then vice versa. I mean, you have like Oingo Boingo did soundtrack stuff for, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 and like things like that.
And even just building on what you're saying, I mean, one of my all-time favorite horror movies is Suspiria, and so much of that is the soundtrack. Mm-hmm. Anything John Carpenter does. I mean, the Halloween theme is like one of the most iconic movie themes of all time, let alone...
Totally. I mean, we describe an entire kind of music as being John Carpenter music. Like, my friend's brother, his brother does soundtrack stuff, and I was sort of like... Oh, how do you describe it? They're like, it's basically John Carpenter music. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, John Carpenter music. I know what that means. But it's also interesting because like you're translating something like one of the things you can't get from a page is hearing music. Mm-hmm. Do you guys have like a playlist or anything?
I do for mine, for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
send me that link. I want to link to it.
100%, yeah. And I had sent it to Palicki. And he was like into it too, I think, and it kind of fit with how we kind of shaped like what the musician looked like. Because originally, I think the script was talking about like a metalhead, and I was like, yes, but what if? Because as someone who's been in the metal community too, I was like, this works, but like, I think it could be way more sinister if. And so it's kind of cool to like shape that around listening to specific music and stuff like that. And, he's such a good writer, but also like he kind of like let me contribute to it, which is nice. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was mostly listening to the Pixies Debaser album for mine because that's where everything sort of fit in for my story. Yeah, and
that story is incredible.
Well, thank you. I talked with Jen about that before even starting writing it. I was just like, hey, are you like a fan of the Pixies? And Jen was telling me how when they were younger, they'd go to the library to rent CDs or borrow them rather, and one of them that they used to get often was Pixies albums. So it ended up just being like perfect. that we were coming up with that. And then, I mentioned some other bands in the story. Like, I definitely listened to the Chameleon Script of the Bridge a decent amount.
Oh, yeah. I was just really getting into them recently. There was a really great... I was in an essay contest last year called March Vladness, and there was a really great essay by someone who... by former podcast guest Barry Grass, actually, that talked about the Chameleons song Swamp Thing. And then, we kind of got really into them for a bit.
Nice. Yeah, no, they're great. And then I also there's a lot of stuff I also just listen to fairly regularly, like The Cure and stuff like that, which, certainly informs my writing.
So, Liana, what music... Send me that link to the playlist, and I'll link to it. But, what music did you predominantly have in mind working on this?
So, what's funny is one of my favorite bands... I've primarily listened to metal and stuff most of my life, but the older I get, especially, into my early 20s, I started listening to, desert rock, stoner rock, stuff like that, kind of a little more slowed down, and then indie eventually and things like that. I love everything, hip hop and stuff. But one of my favorite bands is called Mini Mansions, and the bassist from Queens of Stone Age is the lead singer of this band. And he recently did a score for a movie, and it was really haunting. And so I was a little inspired off that because it had just came out, and it was when Eric was kind of getting with me, Eric and Joe, seeing what type of progress we would have on the pages. And I was like, okay, I need a playlist to kind of get into this mentality. And a lot of what I listen to is music and comics for me are go hand in hand no matter what. So a lot of my visuals that I end up coming up with are actually from listening to music, and that's why it kind of worked with that story. And so I kind of just went off that one particular singer / composer, and then sort of went from there. And so I added some things I think I added The Last Shadow Puppets, Miles Kane stuff, kind of dark indie, but reminiscent of their older stuff, Alex Turner, Arctic Monkeys type stuff, and things like that, but more so on the darker side.
Really cool. I'm a big metalhead, so I'm definitely interested in checking out that list. But the funny thing about beat metal is there's such a huge genre that I just always joke when somebody's people would be you should meet this person. You both like metal, and then it's the likelihood of the Venn diagram of what I like and they like being the same is pretty small.
Right. Exactly.
One of my first conversations with my husband was also literally just being we're not talking about any of the same bands. Okay.
Yeah. I could go to a Maiden show and then 2 weeks later go to a Slayer show. You know what I mean? But mostly that is in somewhat of the same realm. And people are telling me all this crazy French death metal stuff, and I'm I've never even heard of that. I don't even I would have no idea where to start with that. So yeah, I totally feel you on the Venn diagram metal.
Yeah.
So much. Well, and I also somebody who when I'm reading comics, sometimes when I'm listening to when I'm reading it will just line up really well, and I'm just that went really well. And sometimes I'll be reading something and I'll be this is ridiculous that I'm listening to this and reading this at the same time.
That's awesome.
Nice. Yeah.
Just juxtaposition.
My tastes are all over the place. To give you an example, when I was in 8th grade, the 2 albums I listened to the most were Nine Inch Nails' The Fragile and Sarah McLachlan's Surfacing.
Oh.
Those were the 2 albums I was listening to.
Legit, when Joe and I went on that signing tour, we would listen to... What album was it by Fleetwood Mac? We'd listen to...
Was it Tango in the Night?
Yeah,
right?
Tango in the Night.
Oh, I love that album.
Listen to hip-hop right after, or whatever. It was
Tango in the Night, then it was Andrew WK, then it was then we were oh my god, what about Saves the Day, Stay What You Are? Which this might put me on blast, but after it got announced that My Chemical Romance was going to do that show again, and they might be touring and all of that, I listened to like a few My Chemical Romance songs, and then I was like, all this is really making me want to do is listen to Saves the Day. And so that happened. That is how my mind worked when that happened.
Well, basically everybody who's about 5 to 10 years younger than me in comics is a huge MCR fan, and I was just a little bit too old to really care about them. And so I completely associate My Chemical Romance with comics fans, because like MCR fans and comics fans are like basically the same people, apparently, and they're all a little younger than me, and I'm very happy for you. Congratulations.
Yeah. Oh my god. But yeah, I love music. And also, fun fact about me, my brother Anthony is actually the drummer for Sheer Terror. So
oh wow.
Yeah. So if people are familiar with the hardcore scene in New York, he's does that, and he tours all the time, and he also does some work like just like touring sort of work with like Glassjaw and like some other bands. So like,
oh wow, we probably know some similar people. That was not my scene, but I know people from it.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm pretty sure my uncle used to be their tour bus driver.
Nice. Nice.
Really weird.
Yeah, it's not exactly my scene, but I go to a lot of shows and I enjoy it when I do. And it's like nice because like you can just feel like you have an immediate sort of respect from the people there when you're just like, oh, I'm here, that's my brother, and they're like, oh, okay, and good, I don't have to like get into a pissing contest with someone. I'm just good.
Oh my
okay.
god, yeah.
That's so funny. Well, do you feel like there's a comparison between anthologies and making mixtapes? Because I saw that in one of the graphics for sure.
Oh yeah, it's definitely like that. It's there was a lot of that. I mean, Eric was really the one about laying out the order for the stories. Some of it had to happen a certain way because we had like the interludes that would lead directly into another story.
Yeah, the way you guys tied in the script for those was incredible to me.
Thank you. Yeah, it
was really cool.
Thanks. It was great. I mean, a lot of it was based on when we would get stuff in. Like some people were able to deliver the scripts early enough that we were like, okay, we can work with this. I love the one where she's eating the spiders, but like, yes, it's
oh my god,
that was one of my favorite. And Christoph and Giles, that story, I really like how that came out. I really love Christoph, and Giles Crawford is sort of an up-and-coming artist that I've wanted to work with for a little bit, and I sort of saw this as an opportunity and reached out to him, and he was able to do it, and Christoph and him both are really into like Australian punk rock and stuff like that, so it really worked out.
Awesome. That's great. But yeah, what's the thing with anthologies also is it feels like they've really become popular in the past several years. Like, 10 years ago, it seemed like basically the Eisners only nominated whatever Dark Horse Presents anthology every single year, and it won every single year. And now there's so many more anthologies out there, and just with like really sort of different theses and purposes. I mean, what's the appeal of anthologies for you?
I mean, for me, I've always loved short form storytelling. Just going in, going out. I firmly believe so many stories can be told like, you can boil any story down to like one comic panel, and then it's like you build the story out from there, and you can keep building and growing. Okay, you have a page now, you have 4 pages, you have 20 pages. So that's interesting to me. And another thing with anthologies that I really love is everyone has a different favorite story. And everyone can kind of come at it from a different sort of angle, and the stories that there are plenty of stories that people are like, oh, it was all right, and then that's someone else's favorite story, and like that's interesting to see. I really like that, and so I like that anthologies often more than other, longer form comics, tend to offer the reader more opportunities to really engage on a deeper level with the work they're holding.
I think from like an industry perspective too, it makes, being able to work with all these different people, or at least being in the same book, it makes the industry a little less isolating. And, you get to share this communal project with everyone and be able to meet them in person, like how Joe and I met, and how, it's a good way for people to break into it or try the industry out without being able to commit all the time to, a 5-issue series or whatever, stuff like that. And it shows like the amount of technology that we have now to, for outreach to, other places that, wouldn't be able to get printed work, with crowdfunding and all that stuff, and being able to, like, accessibility for new readers and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's also really helped a lot of creators of color like Tanika Stotts and Spike Trotman, putting out a lot of anthologies at a time where the industry just a few years ago or so was like, no one buys anthologies, and then you have creators like them making 6 figures or more or less on anthologies, and now everyone's like trying to get in on anthologies, and it's a great outlet for queer creators. There's a lot of queer focused anthologies that get traction. Northwest Press does quite a few. Arledge, I think, is another one that works on queer anthologies, and Margins Publishing as well.
Cool. Well, thank you for those recommendations. So we're coming up on an hour. Let our listeners know where they can find your work online.
Oh, well,
do you want to kick us off, Liana?
Yeah. Well, sorry.
Do you want to kick us off, Liana?
Sure. I'm Liana Kangas, and you can find all my work on Twitter, Instagram, and my website, which is Liana Kangas, at Liana Kangas, LianaKangas.
I like consistency. Easy to find and follow.
Yes, and you can find me on Twitter at Joe Corallo, Corallo, and on Instagram at Corallo Joe.
Noted. Great. Well, thank you guys for joining us. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to see whatever you're working on next.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
And listeners, again, Graphic Policy Radio, we are on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, all the different platforms. And I'm on Twitter at ELANA_Brooklyn. That's Ilana_Brooklyn. Love to get your thoughts and comments and stuff like that over there. And as we like to say, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.